Hi everybody, my name is Jens Larsen. We spend a lot of time talking about what arpeggios and scales we use in the solos, but we don't talk nearly as much about how we use them and how we make strong melodies with them. In this video I'm going to go over 3 different techniques that you can use when you are trying to come up with new material for your solos that are going to make your lines sound like stronger melodic statements and connect better and sound a little bit less like just random licks on each chord. If you want to learn more about jazz guitar, about superimposing chords and improvising over changes, then subscribe to my channel. If you want to make sure not to miss anything, then click the little bell notification icon next to the subscribe button. The first technique I want to talk about is using a pedal point. In this case I'm using the pedal point on the A minor chord, and the idea is then that the pedal point is one note that we keep returning to in the phrase. That's kind of lying. It's kind of like having 2 voices actually. So we have this E and then we have the other part of the melody that's moving on top of it. And this illusion of 2 voices is really useful because it adds a lot of color. Every note that we play in the top voice is sort of related to the note that's used as a pedal point. And it's also a nice way if you spend most of your time with the solos just running scales and running up and down arpeggios without having sort of any change in movement and stuff like that, then this can really break up the melodic movement and add a lot of interest to some of the ideas that you're using in your solos. It works really well also if you want to use it in sort of more of a modal setting. That could be something like this. So really what I'm using here is I'm taking the pedal point that I'm using is going to be a chord note, and I'm playing the whole thing on an A minor chord. So the first pedal point is again the E, so the 5th of the chord. And the second time the pedal point is a C, which is the 3rd of the chord. And I think it's really important that you make sure that if you have a pedal point, you want to relate it to the harmony in a way that it makes sense to really have a note that's sustained on the chord that you want to have sound all the time. Otherwise the melody might not work as well. The concept behind the line that I just played is really coming out of the way that we play chords. So the idea is, of course, if we're going from one chord to the next, like A minor to D7 flat 9, then what's happening is that we're looking at each individual note and then we're moving that to the closest note that we want to have in the next chord. And that's really what I'm doing here. So if I look at the first part of the melody on the A minor 7, it's first an E minor triad, so, and then it's a C major triad. So together that's just a C major 7 arpeggio. And what's happening when I move that to the D7 is really just that I'm taking each note and then looking at what is the closest note that I can move that down to in a D7 altered scale. So for the B that becomes a B flat, for the G that becomes an F sharp, and for the E that becomes an E flat. So now we have, and then I'm just repeating that process, moving down again to the G major 7, so then we get these 2 triads. And I could of course also just move further on through a progression if I made it into a turnaround, for instance. So really that would be something like, the way you want to think about this if you're trying to make lines using this idea is just to put the scales next to each other. So if we take first for the A minor, and then next to that you can really just write sort of a voice-led version of that, which is the D7 alter scale. So in this case I'm going to be starting on the A flat. So, and then you just move the notes pretty mechanically. When you do that, you're probably going to find that sometimes you want to make some choices that are going to sound better and are not going to be a strict voice leading. So an example of that is, instead of moving down, because that's sort of the easiest way to move, you can also move upwards. So if I take the same idea and then move up, then that could be something like this. So here, when I'm moving up, I start with the same idea. So, and then I'm moving it up to this D7 shape, which is actually a D7 flat 5 arpeggio. So if I, strictly speaking, if I'm voice leading this, then probably the E would move up to an F, and then I would have a D half diminished. But somehow it's not as strong as if I make it into an F sharp, because then you can really hear the D7. So, and then now I'm voice leading up again, and the way I want to do that is just taking it again to the next note in the scale. So when I'm resolving the D7, so this pattern, then the C goes up to D, the A flat goes up to A, F sharp to G, and then the D up to E, and then I get this shape. But that's of course also kind of far away in terms of sound from this, and if I want to stick to something that sounds like a little bit more like an arpeggio, then I could resolve it by not moving up with all the voices, and then I'll get something like this. So in that way, while you're still using sort of a pretty systematic approach, you still can make some choices, and it's still worthwhile just looking at what will work and how can I connect in a way that sounds more natural to me. And you want to keep that in mind when you're working this, because if you're too systematic with your approach, then probably you're not going to make some like the really great sounding lines. The technique that I'm using here is motifs. So what I'm doing is that I'm taking a motif, so a melodic statement. In this case it's a 5-note statement, which is this C major 7 arpeggio. Probably the C major 7 arpeggio is the thing that I'm most fond of using on an A minor 7. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 notes, and then I'm moving that around. So in the previous example I was using voice leading to get to the next one. Here I'm much more free about it. So I have this 5-note motif, and then I start moving it around within the scale. The first thing I do is I move it to another place that fits on the A minor chord, and then that's using an E minor 7 arpeggio. Like this, completely the same melody, but just played from somewhere else in the scale. And then I move that to the D7 altered, and here I just do that, moving it up to F minor, so. And then I resolve that down to the G major 7. And the idea here is, of course, there are two things happening. Because you have a motif that repeats, then and also develops, that keeps it sort of developing, and it sounds interesting for whoever's listening. So you're connecting your solo across the different chords and across the different statements that you make. Another thing is also that I'm using these 5-note groupings. So that's really breaking up how the listener is sort of expecting to hear things, because of course they expect to hear the chords change on the beat. Even if you're not aware of it, you still hear like where the heavy beats are in the music, and you still have an idea about what is going on. And when you're using these 5-note groupings, then my A minor chord is kind of 5 beats long. So it should really be 4 beats, because that's where the chords are changing. But melodically it's now 5 beats, and that means that I'm also messing a little bit with what the listener expects, and that is a sort of tension that I then release when I resolve back to the G major on the forehand. Another example of this could be to use triads as a 3-note motif, and that could sound something like this. So here I'm using first an E minor triad on the A minor 7, and then a C major triad, so moving down in diatonic thirds, and then on the D7 flat 9, I'm actually voice leading the C major triad down to a C diminished triad, and then I'm going down the scale, so that's going down to a B flat major triad, and then I have this melody just to resolve the whole thing, which is the E flat, so the flat 9, sharp 9, flat 9, then resolving to the 5th of G major 7. In the first example with motifs, I extended the A minor bar into the D7 bar, and here I'm doing the opposite. So I made the A minor a little bit shorter because it's only 8 notes long, so 3 beats, and that's E minor, C major, and then on the 4 I'm already going to the D7 with the C diminished triad, so, and then the tag to resolve it. The way you're gonna get one of these skills and one of these ideas into your playing is probably to sit down, take one of them, and then make some lines with it and see how you can use it, and if you come up with some ideas that sound nice, and try and implement that into your playing. It's gonna take some time. I think if you're transcribing solos, you also already figured out that most of the time when you transcribe a great solo, it's not really because everything is using an exotic scale or is completely reharmonized. it's really just because the people that you're transcribing are really good at making strong melodies with the basic stuff that's just there by playing the song. Of course, I'm also curious if you have a great suggestion for another way of coming up with melodies, or an exercise that you do to come up with some other ways of writing licks than just running up and down arpeggios and scales and adding a few passing notes. So if you have an idea, then please leave a comment. I know I'm curious, and I'm sure that everybody else who's watching the video is also curious what you come up with. If you want to learn more about jazz guitar and this is the first time you see one of my videos, then subscribe to my channel. The videos that I publish here every week are on finding solid methods and good strategies to improve and explore interesting things on jazz guitar. If you like this video and you want to help me keep making videos, then check out my Patreon page. I'm very grateful for the support that I'm getting from my patrons, and it's because of that that I can keep on making videos every week. If you join us over on Patreon, I can also give you something in return for your support. That's about it for this week. Thank you for watching, and until next week.